And also all the equipment. So thank you so much, PASOC, and thank you to New York City Council and the Speaker's Office for allowing us to use the committee room at 250 Broadway. As we jump into this work, we will have community members join us, and we will be doing some hands-on workshopping of final language post 4 months of really deep community engagement work, which we're going to hear a little bit more about today. Wonderful, thank you. So prior to jumping into the work, I wanted to offer a little bit of the lay of the land. Just for those who are joining us online, thank you for joining on Zoom. We traditionally start our commission meetings with some highlights or updates from the core staff. And so I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the team that worked both providing physical labor, emotional labor, their brilliance, and their commitment to racial equity and social justice that allowed for us to have draft equity priorities and for us to be looking at final language, all within 6 months of them starting. The team has been here 6 months, and they have done an immeasurable amount of work, which we're going to hear about today. So just wanted to offer what the agenda is going to be. We're going to talk a little bit about community agreements and how we want to talk about the work today. Lorenzo will offer community engagement recap. So what have we done over the past few months? We're going to turn it over to Maya, who's our research and policy, to talk about our data. Sorry. And then we're going to do a workshop activity to explore the final language. We will do a group share out. And we do have enough commissioners to vote on the final language today. So the goal for today's meeting is to close out the first set of community equity priorities for the first value, which is to justly value all talents and contributions. So what we want to do right now is offer some just introductions. If we are recording this Zoom so that we can post it live, and we would love to make sure that people who are watching know who's in the room. So if we can have the commissioners introduce themselves, your name, your pronoun, and who appointed you, what appointment seat you fill. And then just for the record, my name is Linda Tajani. I am the chair and executive director for the Commission on Racial Equity. I'm going to turn it over to the Imam to get us started.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Commissioner Imam Ahmed Ali Wazir, and my pronouns are he, him. Thank you. And I'm appointed by the Mayor's Office. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mr. Gabriel. I am the appointee for Mayor's Office, also representing the voices of people 25 and younger. Pronouns are he, him.
Hello, my name is Grace Pian. My pronouns are she, her, and I was appointed by the Mayor's Office.
Pesach Osina, and I was appointed by the Speaker, Adrian Adams.
Almirka Santiago, I am a mayoral appointee, and my pronouns are she, her, ella.
I'm Yesenia Mata. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I was appointed by the Speaker's Office.
Hi, good evening. Francesca Perone, she, her, hers, and appointed by Speaker Adams.
Good evening. Wendy Starr, she, her, hers, appointed by the mayor. Nice to see all of you.
Hi, everyone. Adam Abba. I am appointed by the Speaker, Adrian Adams, representing the Bronx.
Good afternoon. Dr. Torian Easterling, mayoral appointee, and I use the he series.
Great, thank you so much. We do have folks who have joined us online and would love for all of you also to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, if you're affiliated with an organization, and your pronouns, and we can see the chat on the screen, so feel free to jump on in. We're going to turn it over now to and introducing our staff. Lorenzo, who's our Director of Community Organizing and Engagement, who will walk us through what our community agreements are.
Hello. Oh, hi. I'm Lorenzo, as Linda said. So I'm just going to walk us through our community agreement so that we have like a kind of guideline for our conversation today. And I think there's an image next to that if you click next, on that screen. There you go. All right, excellent. So it doesn't look like there's just blank space. So in terms of community agreements, we like to offer these first 5, but if there's more that people need, we can certainly add to the list. So the first one is make I statements. So essentially, speaking from your own experience, trying not to make generalizations about any particular group. Yeah, and doing that. Number 2, we say take space, make space. So if you're someone who takes up a lot of space in conversations, or speaks up a lot, make space for other people to participate. And if you're someone who is very quiet and doesn't know if you should speak, we want to hear your voice, right? So please take up all the space that you need to take up. Then we have oops and ouch, which is basically a way to be mindful of the gap between what you say and your intention and the impact that it has, right? Because sometimes we say things that has an impact. Maybe we don't intend it, maybe we do, but either way, it's a way to acknowledge the impact that has happened, right? So if someone feels like they've been harmed by anything that's said, you can say ouch, and then the person who has said it can say oops, and we can also decide whether we need to address it in the moment or afterward or however it needs to be addressed, right? Then number 4, we have we don't have to agree. Obviously, New York, there's millions of us, right? We're not going to agree on everything, but what we can do is we can still find the places where our work and our beliefs intersect, right? So that we can still move forward to make change. And then lastly, one mic. So, if someone's speaking, just trying to make sure to listen to each other, and signaling if you want to speak next, either raising your hand or on Facebook Facebook, Zoom, or in person, however you may want to indicate that you want to speak or have questions, right? So are there any other community agreements that anyone might need to feel comfortable in this space? All right. All right, well, can everybody move forward with these agreements? If I can see a thumbs up from people. Yeah, oh my God, so exciting, so many thumbs up. I'm sure some thumbs up online too. But yes, all right, great. So we can move on then. And if anything comes up, people can always add it to the chat or come up to us later and let us know. So going to the next slide.
Can we just do a quick mic test because some of the folks on Zoom are not able to hear or having trouble hearing us in the room?
Hello, hello, can you hear me at all?
Hazel, are you able to share if you can hear Lorenzo?
It's very
Oh.
low.
All right, I'll try to speak up. Sorry. All right, so sorry that I have my back to some of you, but hello everyone. So I just wanted to do a little bit of a recap on our community engagement work. So as folks know, we were able to get 4,212 responses from the public. And as you can see, there's a map of the Tree Neighborhood Network. And each yellow star represents a community conversation that was held, which was 15 to 20 community members talking about these draft community equity priorities, finding out more about CORE and how we came to be, and then also just discussing what they might need to make the city more equitable, right? And then the purple stars indicate any community events that we tabled at, things like that. And yes, So you can see we had events all over the city, thanks to our community partners, really. We held introductory sessions with 110 different organizations. So people came to find out more about CORE from from over 110 organizations. We hosted about 17 facilitator trainings for community members to learn how to host these conversations. Then our partners, the organizations that we worked with, hosted over 220 community conversations. And that was with about 42 different community organizations that worked with us. We also engaged with over 160 faith-based leaders, over 20 arts organizations, and we received 525 responses online through our web form that were outside of community conversations. We also received 5 written comments from different organizations. But overall, we're really excited and grateful to all our community partners for all the hard work that they did to really get the word out and to, talk to people and engage with them. Any questions or what questions do you have for me around this? Or thoughts, comments? All right. Okay, well, fantastic. All right, so we can move on to the next piece. And I think I'll be passing that back to Maya. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maya Williams. I am the Director of Research and Policy here at CORE, pronouns she, her. I'm going to walk us through the data, but before I start that, I just want to uplift our gratitude about, just everyone taking part of this, inviting their feedback. We are so proud to just know that we've reached multiple identities across New York City, and to hear and understand the experiences that multiple New Yorkers are going through when it comes to these priorities. So we'll start just with some big key takeaways, right? We have heard from community members that people felt heard in a real way, whether that was in community conversations, whether that was through the online experience. People just express so much gratitude around CORE's proposal, being able to consider all identities when it comes to advancing racial equity. So not only are people excited to be in contact with CORE, but really recognizing that CORE's proposals acknowledge how race intersects with other identities. So gender identity, class, age, ability, and how those factors exacerbate racial inequities. We had an open text box in our survey, and people were very proud to just say they're happy that CORE exists. They thanked us for their work. And I can definitely say the team feels the same way. People had a lot of strong enthusiasm for collaboration with CORE. Seldom are our communities asked about what it is that they're experiencing, especially communities harmed by racism. And we've invited the space to provide people to tell us what they think. And really they're getting that space from a government entity, which is not always the case. So from start to finish, we have and will continue to make sure that we uplift the work of community and make sure that's contributed within all CORE's work, whether that's research, policy, and any other program initiatives that we take part in. We did have a few set of voluntary questions that offered for people to share their personal information or demographics. Although that section was voluntary, we heard a lot from people in the ways that they identify. And that really is just to get an understanding of the diversity and the multiple identities across respondents. This also allows us to see and understand where and with who do inequities exist within New York City. A lot of respondents shared that they want clear, simple, and easy community equity priority language. So many of you, if you're familiar with the community equity priorities, we will say they were dense in language. A lot of people shared that the language was confusing. They mentioned that if they were better able to assess the language, that they would be able to better determine if they agree or disagree. So that's something that we'll take in mind as we go through this process with finalizing the priorities. And then also noting that some of the priorities offered maybe more than one ask or more than one implementation or approach, where people may agree with some part of it, but then there's another part that they were not too sure about. Another key takeaway was that respondents shared additional community equity priorities for CORE to consider. So whether they agree with things, they really were open to say, hey, you're missing this. They offered many other things that they're experiencing that they would either like to add within the priorities or offering things that they would want to remove or change. And those are also some things that we'll take into place as we finalize the priorities. There were more people who marked neither agree nor disagree with the draft community equity priorities. The way it was set up, people had the opportunity to say if they strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, or strongly disagree and disagree. But there were more people who marked neither agree nor disagree throughout. And again, that can just lead to the nuance that a lot of the community equity priorities offered. We opened the community survey to respondents from as young as age 11 and older. And you'll notice here on the screen, we did have one respondent that identified at the age of 10. And I think we attest that to the excitement of people being heard and just really wanting to be involved. But in the age range of respondents from 10 to 17 years old, they were the population who mostly marked neither agree nor disagree with the community equity priorities than those who marked disagree. And we want to further look at this. We'll consider like exploring why that is, could be to the language or just the knowledge of young people about a lot of these things that were presented in the priorities. Over 80% of community members agreed with 13 of the draft community equity priorities, and 68 through 78% agreed with 3 community equity priorities. And that's important to know. A lot of them talked about many different like lived experiences and a lot of things that is happening within New York City. But the 3 community equity priorities that led to the least number of agreement, those were also the priorities that came up a lot in community conversations, around discussions, and we'll walk through that as we continue this process. I will say none of them were the ones that we will talk about today within our first fundamental values. So come back in the next few days to hear about those. All right. Yeah, next slide. So who we've heard from, we shared again that the demographics questions were voluntary. You can see on the screen, the highest population of respondents identified as Black, African American. When it comes to race and ethnicity on the survey and the feedback response, we gave people the opportunity to select as many race and ethnicities that apply to them. And that's just to recognizing the multiple identities in New York City. Respondents could choose as many race and ethnicities as they would like. When it came to Hispanic and Latinx, the way we analyzed that was just recognizing that needed its own category, but we also had a multiracial category for people who chose multiple race and identities. We do recognize that, in our next phases of community engagement, really wanting to hone in on our population of folks who identified as Middle Eastern or North African, American Indian or Alaskan, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. That was like a least population for respondents. But we also had a question where we let people choose if they were adopted or unknown, just recognizing that that's, a familiar experience for New Yorkers. So that's noted there. We have an additional question that asks people to share with us their ancestry and or ethnic origin, as well as a question that asks people if they identified as Native to the United States. And just in our, just going through the responses for that question, when it comes to Native to the United States, we recognize that a lot of people had a varying perception of that question, but you'll see to your left in that image the many different ancestry and ethnic origins that people identified as. We also had a question where we asked people about their preferred language. And also just wanting to uplift that the community feedback response was offered in multiple languages. So, but people had an option to share with us within the feedback response what their preferred language was. We had a question where we asked people to identify the zip code within which they lived. So for CORE, our outreach, which is also laid out in the charter, it mandates us to target communities harmed by racism which is also known as just marginalized communities, and just uplifting that there's many populations of people who are just underserved and underrepresented. But our target, the closest measure for that within the city are the communities that have been identified by the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity. And those were the 33 neighborhoods who've experienced the greatest impacts of COVID-19, which would include cases of illness, deaths, evictions, and financial loss. They're also the same communities who experience long-term disinvestments and highly populated with people of color. So we made sure to target those communities, and you can see that here at the map to the right. But that to the left is just showing the number of respondents that came from all 5 boroughs. Again, recognizing that these questions were voluntary. 18.1% of people preferred not to answer the zip code that they came from. But of the total New York City population, as you know, people of color make up the largest of New York City when we think about Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Queens. And in contrast to that, the least populated in boroughs of Manhattan and Staten Island. But you'll notice our respondents, 23.5% identify that they live in the Bronx, 22.4% identify that they lived in Brooklyn, 15.2% in Queens, 12.7% in Manhattan, and 8% in Staten Island. And when it comes to the communities identified by the Task Force on Racial Equity and Inclusion, the total number of respondents that identified living in a tree neighborhood was 58.3%. And again, just showing you here that the highest number of respondents within those specific communities came from the Bronx, and then followed by Brooklyn. We had a question that asked people to identify their age, and just again, recognizing that all of these take into play where we think about the different experiences that even age groups have within New York City, especially young people. Our highest number of respondents were in the early 35 through 44 age years, and the lowest number of respondents were 85 or older. We actually heard from 34 people in that age group. And then just thinking about young people in particular, 21.3% of respondents were under the age of 25, while 78.7% were 25 years or older. And then again, just recognizing how people just preferred not to answer this question when it came to age at 28.3% of the respondent population. We did ask people about identifying their gender and gender identity. This question also was another one where people had the opportunities to select all that apply. And that number is shown there in the multiple gender identity population, which is at 0.3%. But the highest population of respondents identified as women, followed by 27.3% men. And then just in general, more people who prefer not to disclose their gender or gender identity was more than the total number of people who identified as any other gender than woman or man. We had a question that asked people to share their level of education. More people chose not to answer this question, but those who did mostly have a 12th grade or less education background, followed by a high school diploma or similar, which you'll see there as 17.6%. So the next image was regarding a question that we asked people if they identify with a disability or other chronic condition. And we've asked people this question, just recognizing that it's something that's not always asked, especially through, specific agencies, but just recognizing it's a real lived experience across New York City. And a disability is a chronic condition, but a chronic condition is not always a disability. So just giving people the opportunity to think about that within this public feedback response. Chronic conditions are persistently higher among Blacks, and non-Hispanic Latinx Blacks have an average life expectancy of 77 years, while non-Hispanic Latinx white people have an average of 82 years. So you'll see here the number of respondents. Most of them did recognize that they do experience a disability or other chronic condition. All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Maya. We're going to get into the responses and we're going to talk a little bit about the specific percentage breakdown from strongly agree to strongly disagree. But what I want to offer folks before we dive in is a few different pieces. One, as an overall note on demographics, we're core launched in response to the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And unfortunately, we have many, many names of loved ones in New York City that were killed as a result of police violence and or have been harmed, experiencing both harm due to racism as well as social injustice. And so people took to the streets and said, not only to protect their identities and save their lives, but also to ensure that we structurally change New York City so that equity is an outcome from all of our work. Everything that we do should be equitable. Everything that we do should be racially equitable. And so what I want to note is that when we both look at the responses and we think of the demographics, that we understand that those who responded to us in this political moment are brave. That in this moment, racial equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not only being intact or being disinvested, but is also presented as a conversation that we should not be having, is presented as a conversation that makes people fearful of really talking about what is their day-to-day struggle. The prefer not to answer is a very serious percentage that we take very seriously at CORE. And we're very grateful to those who felt comfortable and safe in that space when responding in the conversation or responding to the forum to tell us more about who they are. And we want to continue to invite those demographics, not only because it actually is required by law that we have and ask about disaggregated data, but for us to better understand who is underrepresented and who is underserved and help us stick close to our charter mandate. So we're going to go into the responses and keep in mind the demographics, but also for all of us as commissioners, we are appointed to represent the communities we come from, the identities that we hold, the people that we serve as public officers. So I ask of you to also bring in your own identities, your own lived experience, and really understand that the new language that is being proposed is to respond to communities' call for clear, simple language that gets at the heart of the work that we were mandated to do, the reason why we're here today, but also speaks to our values and our commitment to racial equity and social justice. So we will dive in now.
So CORE's draft community equity priorities are structured based on fundamental values laid out within the preamble. The first 5 that we'll talk about today fall under the fundamental value for our government. We call on our government to justly value all talents and contributions. And you'll see within these first 5, we're really just calling into action that New York City is a multiracial democracy. And these are the things that community wants government to center and measure around this fundamental value. So the first draft community equity priority reads to close the racial gender identity, age, and disability gaps in city government positions that create or decide over city policy with individuals who are committed to equity and social justice. So I'll also just name that while Lorenzo was leading community engagement within New York City, I was doing some engagement with agencies, right? Doing some engagement with publicly available data that will really tell us a story about the inequities that are presented within these community equity priorities. So looking at publicly available data to be able to understand what it is that communities are experiencing, understanding why that they have, proposed this as something that they want government to center and measure. And we will just share with you a few things that's laid out within the community equity profile that we've created. And that's to your right. But in terms of how communities responded to this draft community equity priority. I'm sorry, I can not see the percentage. 1 second. Thank you, yeah. Yes, thank you. So again, we've asked communities to respond to these draft community equity priorities, and you'll see here within the over 4,000 respondents, 83.4% of New Yorkers have told us that they agree with this priority. 8% of respondents just chose chose not to agree nor disagree. Again, speaking to, understanding whether that's the language or just the nuanced conversations that these community equity priorities present. And then 6.7% of respondents disagreed with this community equity priority. So when I talk about like the publicly available data that CORE really just try to understand what it is that, is available for communities when it comes to telling a story about what it is that they're asking, right? So within this priority, communities have said, we want to see more people that not just look like us, being policymakers, but people who are committed to equity and social justice. So as you can imagine, publicly available data is not as specific to the ask of communities, but CORE trying to understand what it is, what the lay of the land is for New York City when it comes to policymakers. We look to the policymaker list submitted by agencies to the Conflict of Interest Board to really understand, how diverse policymakers are or not, really trying to understand how does that population show up within city government. And within that list, it really recognized policymakers as public servants who hold a role within city government, being being in charge of major units of an agency, whether they be a member of boards and commissions. And these people, as public servants, have to file annual disclosure reports with the Conflict of Interest Board. And you'll note that they're COIB, but they're not required to include demographics as a part of this report. So when we're trying to understand the disparities within this population, that's hard to do without the demographics. Agencies collect demographics separately, but that's not relative to just a population of policymakers. So the demographics of city workers are available, right? That's shown up through a lot of the data with the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. And we try to say, okay, close population would allow us to examine what that population looks like. And that shows up within the data as city leadership. So those are people who work for the city who hold a position as an administrator or a manager, but that doesn't really tell us about policymakers and the demographics of that population. What it does do, though, is tells us the disparities within city leadership, right? So we're showing in this graph the disparities of people who hold positions as administrators and managers. And you'll notice here that people who identify as white people have more city leadership positions as opposed to people who have just a city position in the total workforce. But more white people have city leadership positions than people of color in general within city government. So recognizing what we mentioned around communities asking for simple language. Communities also told us, hey, we actually don't just want it for policymakers. We want it for city government positions in general. They're concerned about having people just working for the city, looking like them, understanding their lived experiences. So that shows up, and we tried to capture that both in simplified language and with the ask that showed up in our open text box. And the proposed new language reads to close the racial, gender identity, age, and disability gaps in city employment and ensure that government job duties advance the city's stated commitment to racial equity. Huh? Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you. But they're not. Yeah. All right, so the second draft community equity priority really talks about how civic engagement plays a role. How does the community get an opportunity to be a part of decision-making, planning, and implementation when the policies are being created, when they're being thought out, when existing rules are being reviewed that speak to legislation, budgets, and programs that really affect our communities. And communities have told us that they want to be more involved in this process. They want to be involved not just when it's time to vote on things, but really earlier on in the process. And you notice here, 85.4% of our respondents agreed with this community equity priority. Thank you, Lorenzo. And then it's a blue, it's a purple. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Yes, 5.9% of respondents disagreed with the community equity priority. So when we were trying to understand the publicly available data, really just wanted to examine like what processes communities are invited in. And you'll notice there the New York City Rules City Administrative Procedure Act is something that we took a look at. And again, like any of these things that we're presenting here, we're not saying it's the only opportunities. I think we were looking for stuff that is more like most relevant and familiar that government operations can, can be examined to further understand as to why certain disparities or inequities exist. So the City Administrative Procedure Act is an opportunity for our city to promote transparency and engagement through the New York City rulemaking process. And you'll notice the 3 steps in this chart in orange are the processes where community is invited in. So if you look at that, communities are offered their experience 4 steps later into the process, right? So by then, rules have already been drafted. Agencies have already proposed rules to the law department and the mayor's office of operation. And then 2 steps following that is when agencies have public hearings and offer public testimony on proposed rules. And then they go back and they review that testimony, and then a rule is amended following after that, right? But communities are like, hey, we want to be a part of this before that process. How can we be a part of it when like laws are being drafted? So that's one process that we're looking at in terms of civic engagement and how we can close the gaps for that and remove barriers for communities. Community boards, as well as the Civic Engagement Commission, was also something that has some publicly available data. Community boards represent specific districts. There are 59 of them within New York City, and they really give an opportunity for communities of all ages to voice their opinion when it comes to local policy and decision-making. And we know that community boards are very active within communities and have a really close relationship with politicians and policymakers. So we try to look at some of that data to really understand it's been said and it's been reported that community board members or the boards in general are not really reflective of specific communities. They don't really identify with the demographics within those community districts. So we try to look at that, and each borough has a public report that really speaks to the demographics of community boards, but a lot of the data that's presented is inconsistent. It's really hard to like be able to say a general sense of representation across New York City when it comes to race, age, gender, and other various categories. So this was one of the most data points that I thought was really helpful when we think about closing the gaps for civic engagement. 8% of community board members have a disability compared to 13% of the New York City population. In CORE, we just really want to be able to look at this data closer, to be able to really think about the disparities within boards, really think about how gender shows up within specific boroughs, the age. A lot of the board reports speak to and separate age of under 40 or over 40. But we can't really tell a story about that when we think about like young people, right? How are young people presented in community boards? How are specific disaggregated race and ethnicity showing up within community boards. So that's something that we want to take a closer look at. And then you'll notice the Civic Engagement Commission. Many of you may be familiar with the People's Money Program, which is something similar to what we've tried to do within this process is open up some feedback for ages 11 and older. But within the Civic Engagement Commission, they really invite communities to consider within a citywide process, what are their priority issues, how they should be addressed. And this program has allowed for many program initiatives to be implemented. You'll see that they've spoken and heard from over 200,000 New Yorkers. But when it comes to the success of a lot of these programs, thinking about the funding, right? Like how is funding allocated to make sure that community engagement persists, to make sure that they're able to really continue to engage with local organizations that have relationships with community members to make sure their voice is heard consistently. Recently, they experienced some budget cuts that they've shared with us that really can impact their engagement and really impact the opportunity that communities would have to make decisions on budgets and particular programs. So these are some things that, was available for us to just speak to civic engagement. If you can zoom out, Lorenzo, I'll just read to us the newly proposed language. Again, keeping in mind people wanting more simple language. And it reads to remove barriers for communities harmed by racism and social injustice, to shape and get updates early and often on New York City government plans, actions, and review progress. Okay. Number 3, the draft community equity priority names to close the racial, gender identity, age, and disability gaps in salaries for city employees and staff at organizations working with New York City government. You'll see 83.5% of respondents agree with this community equity priority compared to 6.5% of disagreement. And this is laid out plain, right? Salary gaps, how people of color and women are being paid less than other race, ethnicities, as well as people who identify as men. And you'll notice there we had some data around agencies with the lowest representation of female employees have a median salary above the citywide average salary, which is $75,933. You notice in this chart named titled median salary by race and ethnicity, people who identify as white, the median salary is $85,292. Other race and ethnicities are being paid less than that population. Within this graph here, agencies with the largest pay gaps just really tells a story about specific agencies who are, showing up paying white people versus people of color. The ABLHO includes Asian, Black, Latinx, Hispanic, and other people of color, but the data there just shows those salary gaps within New York City agencies. And again, this is another one of those instances where we would just invite and really look to further disaggregated data to be able to tell a fuller story about different race and ethnicities, as well as gender and gender identity. The data that is available is limited to just people who identify as male and female. And we would want to just understand better people who identify as other gender identities or non-binary. What is the data explaining about those salaries for those people? And our proposed new language is to close gaps in race, gender identity, age, and disability to improve pay and access in New York City government jobs and contracts.
Just one additional note, folks also said it's not only the pay, but that access to promotion, career growth, and general job opportunities were just as much of a challenge as pay equity. So we did want to include in the new language a way to ensure, one, the data that Maya was able to find, but also to make sure that the change that we're proposing allows for stronger equitable career growth in city government.
Thank you. We can move on to number 4. The draft community equity priority speaks to language accessibility, and people voted on ensure and appropriately fund government and organizations working with New York City government, provide program services, and share written information in the city's top languages at an accessible level. And the data there just shows you 85.1% of respondents agree with this community equity priority, and 4.8% of respondents disagree. So we, again, recognizing the multiracial democracy that we're in, the many different languages that people speak across New York City, we've heard from communities that that's not always accessible when they go to agencies to get services. And again, when we think about looking at the publicly available data, we've learned that the public is allowed to make complaints about language access, whether that's directly with the agency or by calling 311. And even though that opportunity is present, a lot of people throughout communities are not even aware of that. So some agencies do communicate the complaint process better than others. So we pulled this data from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs fiscal year 2023 report that recorded 243 complaints. And again, because some agencies report this better than others, these numbers are just, relative to if people know about it, they're going to call more, right? If people show up to some of these services more, they would understand further that they don't have language accessibility when they get there. But this is really important because we've heard from communities that, some of the services that they are in dire need of, when they get to an agency, they can't communicate what that need is. Maybe there's not a staff person on site that speaks the language that they need. Maybe there's not written materials that's available for the language that they need. And that's an issue when we think about just equitable language access across New York City. You'll notice to the right, the Language Access Secret Shopper program. That program, if many of you are not familiar with it, is a team of multilingual interns who act as undercover secret shoppers. They go to specific agencies to really see how customer service is being offered in multiple languages. They request a specific language when they get there. And this program really just tries to understand what services and what agencies are actually following this, but the program does not act as compliance, right? Agencies receive this information and they're their own compliance officers when it comes to this. So this program does work to collect data on agencies, but just thinking about who holds agencies accountable for the lack of language accessibility services is something that communities have spoken to us about. It's something that we see within the data when we think about this program they offered. They went to 148 agency offices, and I looked at the data just particularly at the Task Force on Racial Inclusion in Equity neighborhoods, right? Recognizing that that's the population that our work is centered around, but 97% of sites across the 148 sites did not have translated signage and required documents available for the public. Out of that, 50% of the visited sites were in the tree neighborhoods, where we know that if these are communities that are highly populated with people of color, the demand for language access would be much higher. But 25% of sites within this neighborhood did not have signage for translation and interpretation, and 22% of these neighborhoods did not provide the necessary services. So just speaking about how we can really ensure equitable access to multiple languages and making sure that communities are being served in the languages that they need. Next. Oh, sorry, Lorenzo, can you go back? I'll just read the proposed language really quick. So the new language being proposed today is make sure New York City government offices and partners receive money and resources to provide language access services in the city's most spoken languages. And before we move on, I'll just say within the community feedback, people spoke to the idea of like, yes, agencies may want to do this. Yes, we know it's a need, but thinking about like the funding and how that can be supported within agency budgets. So that's where some of the proposed language shows up at. All right, almost to the last one. The fifth community equity priority is around computer-based instructions and algorithms that are used within city government that may be proposing bias or discrimination. So communities have spoken to us and shared that they know of certain like algorithmic tools that city agencies may use that really help decide on services, whether that be in healthcare, housing, education, policing, criminal justice, and employment, as well as social services. And you'll notice 81.2% of respondents agree with this community equity priority, and 6.2% of respondents disagree. So when we think about algorithmic tools, or also known as like artificial intelligence, and how certain formulas and computer-based programs are used to really decide on how agencies provide services, really thinking about how reliable certain algorithmic tools or artificial intelligence is. Communities have said that they recognize that because certain databases are being used, that may hinder how they get chose for certain services. Some of it offers potential bias and discrimination. And we're aware of that. We also are aware of that artificial intelligence is the use of it is expanding rapidly within the city, right? A lot of decisions are being made from this, but really, how is it reliable when it comes to how communities are being served? So you'll see within this data profile, not too much quantitative data showed up when we think about artificial intelligence, but really just recognizing one specific program that our city has implemented recently was the My City chatbot. And this was a source used for answering questions from small business owners. And it received a lot of backlash. A lot of people who were using this certain tool, they would ask specific questions and the response would misstate local policies. It would tell them incorrect information and provide incorrect answers. So this is something that, just one specific example that shows up within the city's use of artificial intelligence. There's also a local law that really calls on agencies to be able to be transparent with New York City job seekers when they're applying to specific city agencies, really sharing with job seekers that they have to inform the candidates that they're using automated tools within their functions. Some gaps within this use of this law is that agencies, again, are have to post bias audits about this, but they're being held accountable to themselves, right? Like they're auditing themselves on the use of this. That's an issue when we think about accountability. And lastly, just showing here the artificial intelligence plan. New York City is the first throughout the country that has introduced its first artificial intelligence plan, action plan. And this is really huge, right? Recognizing that AI is expanding throughout the city, but the current action plans don't actually evaluate these tools for potential biases. City agencies are obligated to share that they're using specific programs, but the offices that they're reporting these to, the reporting doesn't offer them an opportunity to share if certain biases are being used, which really hinders the fact of determining one, the reliability of these tools, and also if discrimination and biases are showing up within that use. So CORE, as you can see, we again did the best that we could with looking for publicly available data around this, but we recognize that we do need further information to really be able to tell a story about how these specific algorithmic tools may be affecting and impacting communities, and how we can really close the gaps to ensure that the implementation of these tools provide correct and unbiased information. And the proposed new language for this is to rewrite computer formulas and processes that may have race, ethnicity, and poverty bias to prevent inequities. And this, again, came out of people just requesting more simpler language. A lot of people weren't too sure about what we meant by computer-based instructions, but also people recognizing that city agencies use specific formulas and processes, again, that they are not too familiar with on decision-making. All right. So this is a new priority. Many people within the community feedback response have asked us to really hold city agencies accountable for the use of disaggregated data. As you can see, when I went through all 5 of them, thinking about how we can really tell a better story about inequities within New York City, tell a better story about disparities, we do need disaggregated data, which is data that will be broken down into further race ethnicities, into further gender identities, to be able to understand if and when disparities are present. And again, many people have opened up to us about the use of disaggregated data. Data is really something that our city uses to determine policies, to determine budgets. And if we're not looking at data in a sense that identifies the different diverse ethnic subgroups, as well as just the multiple identities throughout our city, then we're making policies that's really not calling into who these policies impact. So we've received written testimonies about disaggregated data, and this showed up in our qualitative responses, and it reads: to collect, analyze, and report data on access and use of government services broken down by specific groups harmed by racism and social injustice. So to the commissioners, this is something that, it came up across widely in the public feedback response, and this is a new priority that is being proposed under this fundamental value.
Sorry, one quick note on disaggregated data. I just want to recognize that we have members of CACF on the line who are leading a campaign in New York City right now called Invisible No More, that includes hundreds of organizations and people across the different race and ethnicity categories that both we collected, but also the diversity of New York, that is also pushing this work not only on a city level, but also on a state level. So just want to acknowledge that they are in the room virtually and thank them for their work. Okay. All right. So before we jump into the workshop activity, just want to say Maya became a data guru, for lack of better words, on really everything about government. And one of the biggest takeaways, and specifically for our commissioners making decisions today with community, there is a deep and extensive lack of data made available to the public. This is an issue that we have heard from many people, both community as well as folks in government, that data has been pulled back, that data is not being shared, that it is not disaggregated, that community organizations are struggling to be able to take data that is made public and analyze it in a rapid response way that allows them the information they need to properly participate and influence policy decision-making. So the data that you will get in front of you, the profiles, which will also be posted on our website shortly after this process is completed, you're going to be able to look at the profiles and work through the workshop activity. But just want to note, you will likely have questions that may sound like, I would really love to know this. I want you to know that we also had those questions. And we wanted to be really intentional to share and make decisions on data that was publicly available so that the public also knew what data we were seeing. We don't want to have to hide what decisions we're making or what data we're using. So everything that you see here today is what you can find online, albeit not easy find online, but still find online. And as part of this process, we do hope that the city moves in a direction to make more data available so that we're making better informed decisions. So Maya is going to be giving out the workshop activity and I'll hand out the profiles. I'm going to turn it over to Lorenzo to talk through our activity.
Thank you. So, it's hard to see because it's so little. So anyways, when we're looking at these final proposed community equity priorities, we really wanted to offer folks a criteria so that like what should we be looking at, right? So what should like drive the decision for finalizing these community equity priorities? So we wanted to offer these four, let's see if I can get them a little bigger. Close enough. These four pieces, right? These four questions that you might want to ask yourself, right? So the first one is about structural change. So does the new priority language require to enact a change in how they operate? Or sorry, it's not very good. Yeah. And number two, we wanted folks to think about, is it about racial equity? So does the new priority advance the vision of a city where race is not determinative of outcomes, or, outcomes happen regardless of race? Then number three, would anyone like to read number three for me?
Number 3 is related to equitable outcome. Does the new priority tell us how the well-being of communities harmed by racism and social injustice could improve?
Thank you. And then the last question is number 4, or about community power. Anyone want to read that one for me?
Number 4, community power. Does the proposed priority need agencies to seek increased input from community members?
Great. So we actually have like a worksheet. We're going to split folks into groups with community and commissioners. And we're gonna have folks work through the worksheet so that you can look at the 6 proposed final priorities of the first set, rather, right? Because we know it's 3 sets. Today is just the first set that we're going over. And really kind of decide what we want to do with them, right? And look through them. And really use these questions as kind of a guide to the work that we're doing. What questions do we have before we break up into groups? And we are also going to have a breakout group on the Zoom, so don't worry, we got you. So it feels clear to folks? Yeah? Thumbs up?
Well, I
Thumbs
think our
sideways?
clarity targets that, yes. Yeah.
Yes, so you're going to be in the group also with the commissioners. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 3 community members in the room and the rest on the breakout. So there will be 2 commissioners likely in smaller conversations. So if the commissioners can stand up, we're gonna go to the other side. You're not gonna be by your mics. Torian, you're welcome to lead the Zoom one since you're right by the computer.
We're gonna have like maybe 2 groups in the room. Oh, if we can. just to let folks know, we're going to take about half an hour to try to move through these and then check in. Thanks.
Because remember, I'm logged in twice on the port. So one is streamed on the main one, and this is the second one that I've been using to accept people in. So that's why it's showing at the top. Yeah, yeah. Because the council computer is what you're seeing here. And then the second NYC port login that is me as opposed on my laptop is the breakout room here. Yeah, those are here. Yeah. Yes. Because, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Hey folks, sorry, just checking in. Just wanted to let folks know you have about 15 more minutes. So if you're not up to number 3, you gotta really move forward. Thank you. Take care. Hey folks, sorry to interrupt, but we have about 5 more minutes left to work in our groups, and then everyone's gonna get about 3 minutes to present out to the group. Thanks. All right, 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts before we come back. All right, all right, all right. All right. Hello, welcome back, everyone. Whoa, there was so much to talk about. You're good. All right, well, can we actually have the commissioners come back up here so y'all can do the report out? Or, but the mic. Oh, sorry. I mean, I don't know if I could, it's heavy. Sorry.
You saw that, right?
No, nobody
The
saw that.
mic's on, right? The camera's on.
All right, so. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have maybe like one commissioner or one person from each group just report out on like maybe 2 or 3 things that you talked about in your group. Remember, you have at most 3 minutes. So just 2 or 3 key things that you talked about in your group. We're gonna collect all the sheets, so we're gonna have your notes. Don't worry about it. We're not gonna miss it out. But yeah, we want to hear folks report back from all 4 groups. All right, so which group wants to go first?
Okay, so hello, everyone. So Yesenia Pesak and I, Francesca Prone, we met with Daphne and Michael to discuss 3 of the priorities. So we spent a bit of time on the first priority to ensure that not only, so we kept the new proposal of ensuring that we close the racial, gender, and gender identity, age, and disability gaps in city employment to ensure that government job duties advance the city's stated commitment to racial equity. And we included with individuals that are committed to social justice. So ensuring that at the macro level, jobs are ensuring that the city is keeping its commitment to equity and also employing individuals that have that commitment to similar equity initiatives.
So we ended up making changes to number 2, We only got up to number 3 because we got too excited, so we couldn't get through all of them. We have very deep conversations. But for the proposed new, what we made the change, what we asked to change was to say instead, ensure that communities harmed by racism and social justice can shape and get updates from all government entities early and often on NYC government plans, actions, and review progress. Because we know that many, I'm just going to speak as a nonprofit for myself, sometimes we do need specific data in order to be able to better serve our communities, in order to create better programs, and also be able to obtain funding to be able to support the community. So for us, we did say that it's very important to include from all government entities to get this data as often and early. And for the third one, we made the change of saying close gaps in race, gender identity, age, and disability in pay and access in NYC government jobs and contracts, because we thought that this would be very much more specific and very straightforward.
Hi, I can go next. Our team, we addressed 1 through 5 for the most part. With number 1, we discovered this while we were at 3. There was an issue to access prior to employment, right? Internships were brought up. So the suggestion was to say, close the racial, gender identity, age, and disability gaps in city internships and employment for members, right? To ensure that access across, right, opportunities offered by city are considered. Number two, we had a lot of questions and some suggestions. There was the desire to quantify the whole like get updates early and often. There's like an actionable word that we were looking for so that it's clear in providing the power, right, to community to be involved in not just getting, right, early and often updates, but I guess fleshing out a little more the to shape portion of it, right? That's where we were with number 2. So we didn't have exact wording for what a revised version would be, but that was the idea behind what we were thinking. Number 3, we added to addressing what we were talking about in the presentation, how there is also the desire for promotions and career growth in that one. So it would just be remove gaps in race, gender identity, age, and disability to improve pay, promotional and career growth opportunities, and access in New York City government jobs and contracts, because this gives them the how, right, to provide that. And it just also is more clear in letting them know what we mean in that priority.
Sorry, so we want to hear, no, it's okay. We want to hear from other groups as well. And we're gonna get kicked out soon. That was the other piece. So we would like to dive in to another group, maybe Drew and Grace, if you wouldn't mind.
So in our group, we went through all of the priorities. I guess the key takeaway that we essentially got, well, I'll just kind of go to each one very quickly, and then Grace, you could fill in anything that I may have missed. But especially for the first proposal, looking to include a benchmark too as well, and also make it citywide as far as the language necessary that we saw, and also necessarily having to differentiating between sexual orientation as well as gender orientation too within that first proposal. As far as the second proposal, more so just focusing on the outreach, as well as necessarily having that outreach be done early as possible, as well as language access, language tool access for those proposals, so that this way it's working along with the communities and in populations that necessarily we know are going to need it too as well. And then for the third proposal, It is sorry. Yes, adding a language gap. So we focused a lot within our group, focusing on access to language, but then also necessarily looking at different populations too as well. So as a part of that, there's one thing that we also learned was that the court system, which is necessarily run state government, they actually have interpreters within the court systems that they could currently pay right now at a certain rate, and figuring out necessarily what does that look like when we talk about the parity scale for people that are working within the city, and seeing what that scale or hourly rate is. I think when, if Sherry was still on, he said it was like close to about 300 and something either for the day or a session towards that. So what does that look like per hour, right? And then the fourth one, hire within the community to fill the void, was more or so the theme of what we were focusing on. The language itself, no complaints, or unless I misheard something. For the fifth one, instead of using the word, instead of using the word rewrite, looking at either using evaluate or design, as a way necessary to change what that language looks like. So to evaluate computer formulas and processes that may have race, ethnicity, and poverty biases, to prevent inequities. Right. And then the last one, just changing the way that necessarily was presented, by instead of including report, well, we would remove report and use publish, so that this way that document, and also the information that is being collected can also go out to the community at large.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. Okay, I'll jump in for the other online group. Thanks so much to Hazel and Gilbert and Talia, Tiffany as well, Maya's mom. Wendy and I met with them. Really some key points. I think overall, they felt as though all of the 6 priorities met the criteria, at least one of them, which is really great. There were some rewrites and some language changes that they're proposing, where there could be more specificity around the inequities. For instance, in priority number 5, they want to re-add healthcare and housing and education and policing, because they think that the specificity is really helpful for our community. In the new priority, they felt as though it's really important that we are explicit around where accessibility to the community could be laid out in the priority for the data reporting. And I thought that was really helpful. And I know we're short on time, so those are the 2.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone online, and those of you who are in the room and made time. We will be doing this again tomorrow. We have learned a lot from today's experience, and so we will be doing a few more things tomorrow to just make sure that folks online have access to all the materials in advance. For those of you who are here today, bring a friend tomorrow. Yes, and we do have free t-shirts, which we are giving away. So please make sure to get your t-shirt before you leave. For those of you who are online, feel free to come tomorrow in person. One thing that I just want to say before we leave, so the original intention was that because we have quorum, we could vote on the language. But I think what we heard today was that there are still some edits that need to be done, and we want to honor the contribution of everyone in the room. This was the first time that we did a community and commissioner edit and workshop together. We're going to be doing this more often. And what we wanted to just share, instead of a vote, I wanted to just be clear about how we're going to use this. So we are going to make some edits to the language. I do want to flag that part of the edits is also a review by the law department. And that means that not everything that you say may be included in the actual priority language, but it doesn't mean that it won't be included in our summary to the city, in our public response to the city's preliminary and final racial equity plans, and that some of the language that was shared today are also really great language for outcomes and indicators that we want to see the city collect. So everything that you share today will be used. If you do not see it in the priority language itself, please know that it will be used in follow-up reporting. We don't like to leave information or considerations on the table. We take it with us where we go.
Hey, Jerry. Hey, Jackie. Hey, I'm just jumping off another call, so I'm gonna mute myself.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, so for everyone that's here, thank you so much for your time. Commissioners, thank you for coming out. We will see you tomorrow. Bring a friend. They are more than welcome. And we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.